Well, it's not just where Americans are food shopping that's changing. The actual food we eat is changing. Let's take a look now at how food has evolved over the years. In 1621, the first Thanksgiving feast. 1700s, the birth of French fries. 1800s, the hamburger came along to go with the fries. 1885, the sugary carbonated beverage Dr. Pepper came into being. And in the early 1900s, more processed foods came about, like Hostess cupcakes. 1937, for better or worse, canned meat became a reality. That's when we got Spam. In 1982, the Food and Drug Administration approved GMO foods. In 2001, if you weren't getting enough omegas in your diet, they've somehow injected the fatty acids into eggs. And going along with making foods more convenient, in 2002, the creation of tearless onions. Now in 2035, some are predicting our dinner plate will look much, much different. Red carrots, lab-injected hamburger patties, fake chicken. And along those lines, in the coming years, we might start seeing new varieties of produce that are bigger and tastier. Our meat engineered in a lab. To help us talk about the food of the future is food historian and author of the book you see there, Lost Arts of Hearth and Home, Ken Al-Bala. Ken, welcome. So we see the food that we eat is constantly evolving. What direction is it heading in?
Well, I think you had a very scary litany of changes there, but I think you predicted the direction very well. Convenience food is definitely on the rise, and I think we're seeing a lot more food that's handheld. I mean, you know, Americans love to have pizza and hot dogs and hamburgers and things that you don't need cutlery for, but I can imagine in the next 20, 30 years, cutlery becoming fairly obscure and maybe even obsolete. You know, once people stop buying steaks or things that need to be cut up, I can see steak knives becoming really difficult to find and people eating most of everything in a pocket or some.
So it's all finger foods is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to think, you know, forks and cutlery as being universal. They're not. They're the past few hundred years, and I can see them disappearing very easily.
We also can see this controversy over GMOs, genetically modified organisms. Can we expect food to further become genetically modified?
Well, this is the trend. You know, right now we're on the cusp of possible legislation. California is trying to pass labeling laws, which will be on the ballot in November. So I think if that passes, the rest of the country might follow suit, and we might have a reaction against GMO food as happened in Europe. But if that doesn't happen, we're going to remain ignorant, at least in this country. And I think we will see a lot more GMO food showing up in our... It's really not in directly consumed products, like you wouldn't find a GMO tomato or a piece of corn that you'd eat on the cob. It really ends up mostly in processed food. So the soy that ends up in soy lecithin or in some kind of additive that's gone into processed food, or of course it goes right into the animals. So when you eat a cow or a pig that's eaten GMO corn, it's not directly consumed by humans, but it's indirect and down the line. Now the thing is, we don't really know what that does to us. So, you know, fingers are crossed that we don't have a big disaster on our hands, or, you know, 10 years after consuming, people find this causes some disease. But the government so far has decided that these are virtually equivalent, that, you know, the corn that is GMO and the corn that isn't is really, you don't have to test the GMO corn because it's the same organism, which I think we might disagree with.
And so just how far can this go, Ken? Are we talking about meat that isn't actually meat, that's created in a lab?
Yeah, well, there's experiments with what they call in vitro meat, and essentially you start, you know, cells replicate, and if you put them in a good medium, a little glass petri dish, and you feed them, they will reproduce and create more. And what is surprising to me is, okay, we have a gross out factor. Immediately we go, ew, you know, who wants to eat meat that's raised in a lab? And right now it's very prohibitively expensive. But PETA has come out on the side saying, well, you know, right now we're raising cattle and mistreating them and subjecting them to indignities. If you raise just the cells in a laboratory, that's a lot more ethically sound. And you can understand where that position comes from. I think meat will definitely become more expensive in the future. and it should be. Right now it's something we eat a lot of. We don't think about the environmental consequences. We don't think really about the scale that meat is raised. What consequences that has for the animals themselves. And I think that the general trend is we're moving toward more grass-fed, more ethically reared, more hormone-free meat, and I think that will catch on in the future. It'll just be more expensive.
All
That's fine.
right, I will definitely say that in vitro meat does not sound delicious. But what do you,
It makes
as we see this trend steering from natural products to more, products that are created in labs, I mean, ultimately, what does that mean? Americans are putting these types of food into their body. How does that impact our health?
Well, there's not a lot of research on it, unfortunately. The people who control the patents to most of the most high tech of foods, GMO especially, really don't want those, it's intellectual property out there, and they don't want other people testing it because they may find something wrong with it. So we really don't know. This is all a very, very big question mark. And as you know, there's always a constant tension in not just American foodways, but around the world, is that you have food scientists inventing new things, creating new flavors and fragrances and things like that go into our food, and you have other people who say, I just don't want this, and I'd rather eat whole foods and things that are grown organically or at least sustainably. And that tension is actually a very good one. I think it promotes better stewardship. On the one hand, it creates greater awareness of food among the general populace. And I think that the industry really can't get away with as much as they used to, or they try very hard to hide it, as they're doing now with GMO. So I think, that tension, we tend to go, if you think of the sort of trajectory of how our attitude towards food changes, the move toward natural food, which was very big when I was a little kid in the 60s and 70s, it's come back now again, and people are starting to do things themselves again, pickle their own, vegetables and cure meats and make cheese and things like that. So there's a definite reaction against industrial food right now that I think is going to be the next trend in a major way for the next several years. And of course, what usually happens is the industry co-opts that. They will label something, organic. I mean, when you see organic Cheetos on a shelf in a supermarket, something is very odd in the universe.
All right. Well, you know what, Ken? If you are what you eat, this is all pretty scary to me. We're going to have to leave it up there. That was Ken Albala, history professor at the University of the Pacific and author of the book, The Lost Arts of Hearth and Home.